Don't make a sound, my housekeeper whispered, grabbing my wrist so hard I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Please, Joanne, you need to come with me right now. It was 6:40 in the morning, the day before my daughter's engagement party. I hadn't even brushed my hair yet. I was standing in my kitchen in Oakville in my housekeeper's grip, in my robe, with half a cup of coffee going cold on the counter, thinking, what on earth is happening? Marta had worked for me for 11 years. She's not dramatic. She's not the type to grab your wrist. She's the type who quietly refolds the towels you already folded because you didn't do it quite right, and she never says a word about it. So when she grabbed me like that, eyes wide, voice down to almost nothing, I went with her. She led me to the side window of the kitchen, the one that looks out onto the back patio and the yard beyond, where my daughter's fiancé had been staying in the guest suite we'd converted from the garage 2 summers ago. A nice space. Private entrance. His idea to stay there the night before the party, to help with setup, he'd said. Marta pointed. Through the window I could see him. Christopher, my daughter's fiancé of 14 months, the man she'd introduced to me with tears in her eyes because she was so happy, the man who had sat at my dining room table and asked for her hand the old-fashioned way and made me cry a little too. That Christopher. He was standing at the far end of the patio in the early morning light, and he was on the phone, that's all. Just a man on a phone call. In my yard. Before 7 in the morning. Marta was still holding my wrist. I looked at her. She shook her head slightly and pointed again, more insistently this time, not at him, but at the gate in the back fence. The one that leads to the alley. There was a woman standing at the gate. She was maybe 35, dark hair pulled back. She had a child with her, a little boy maybe 4 years old, holding her hand in what looked like dinosaur pajamas. Just standing there, in the alley behind my house, at 6:40 in the morning. Christopher walked toward the gate. He crouched down and said something to the boy, ruffled his hair. The boy reached for him with both arms the way small children do, that total unguarded reaching, and Christopher picked him up and held him for a moment with his eyes closed. I watched that and I felt something go completely still inside me. Not panic, not even sadness yet, just stillness. The kind that comes right before you understand something you really don't want to understand. Marta had let go of my wrist by then. I don't know how long we stood there. Eventually, Christopher put the boy down, said something else to the woman, and came back inside through the patio door. The woman and the child left through the alley, gone, like they'd never been there. I went back to my coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table and I thought about my daughter, Annalise. She was 29. She'd wanted to be a landscape architect since she was 12 years old and used to redesign my garden on graph paper in the summers. She'd worked hard, built a good career, had a circle of friends who were genuinely kind people. She'd been hurt once before, a long relationship that ended badly in her mid-20s, and she had taken her time after that. She was careful. She didn't bring people home until she was sure. She had been so sure about Christopher. And now I was sitting in my kitchen, having watched her fiancé hold a child who reached for him like a father. I want to be honest about what I felt in those first hours, because I've told this story a few times since, and people always assume I went straight into action mode, that I was sharp and clear-headed and decisive. I wasn't. I sat at that table for almost 20 minutes not doing anything at all. I thought about how easy it would be to decide I hadn't seen what I saw. That the woman was a cousin. A colleague, a neighbor whose child had wandered. I thought about the engagement party the next day. 60 people, the caterers, Annalise's dress, the photographer. I thought about how much she loved him. Then I thought about that little boy's arms going up, and I got up and got dressed. Marta was waiting for me in the hallway when I came downstairs. She looked at me in that steady way she has. The way that means she's already decided something and is just waiting for me to catch up. You've seen him on the phone at odd hours before, I said. It wasn't really a question. 3 times this month, she said. Always early morning or late at night, always in the yard. And you've seen her before. Once, 3 weeks ago. I didn't see the child that time. I thought perhaps it was. She paused. I didn't know what to think. I almost told you. I should have told you. You're telling me now, I said. I hired a private investigator that afternoon. I know how that sounds. It sounds like something people do in movies. But I had a friend, Dorothea, who'd been through her own difficult situation some years back, who'd used an investigator and had told me bluntly, if you need to know something and you need to know it accurately and you need it to be documented, don't try to do it yourself. Your emotions will get in the way. So I called the number she gave me, explained the situation plainly, and asked what was possible in 24 hours. The investigator, a woman, which I was glad of, told me she'd do what she could. Annalise came over that evening for dinner, just the two of us, the way we often did on the night before something big. She was glowing. I don't use that word lightly, she genuinely was. She'd done her hair differently, and she was wearing a new blouse, and she talked for most of dinner about the seating arrangement for the party, and whether we should move the tables closer to the garden, and I sat across from her and I listened and I thought, I could be wrong. I could be doing her enormous harm based on something I half saw through a kitchen window at dawn. But I also thought about the way that child had reached up. After dinner, she helped me clear the plates the way she always does. Annalise has never once let me clean up alone. Not since she was a teenager. It's just one of those things about her. And while we were standing at the sink, she said, I'm really happy, Mum. I know you worry, but I'm really, genuinely happy. I told her I could see that. I didn't sleep much that night. The investigator called me at 8:15 the next morning. The engagement party was at 4. She spoke for about 12 minutes. I took notes on the back of an envelope because I couldn't find anything else quickly enough. When she was done, I asked her to send me whatever documentation she had as fast as she could. Then I sat in my bedroom and read my notes back to myself. Christopher had a common-law partner in Hamilton. Her name was Deanna. They'd been together for 6 years. They had a son 4 years old, named Teddy. They shared a lease on a townhouse on Upper James Street. He was listed on Teddy's birth registration. He had not, to the investigator's knowledge, told Deanna he was engaged. He was also, the investigator noted at the end, almost as a footnote, but not quite, the subject of a civil claim filed 8 months ago in Hamilton. Deanna was suing him for unpaid child support arrears. The claim had not yet gone to court. I read that last part twice. Then I went to find Annalise. She was in the guest room down the hall, getting ready. I knocked, and she called me in, and she was sitting at the little vanity with her hair half done, and she looked up at me in the mirror and said, Mum, you look pale. Are you okay? I closed the door behind me. I said, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything, because it's going to be hard to hear and it's going to sound impossible. She put down her hairbrush. I told her everything. I told her about Marta waking me, about the window, about the woman and the child in the alley, about the investigator. I put my notes and the documents on the vanity in front of her, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I let her read them. I didn't say anything while she read. I just stayed in the room because I wasn't going to leave her alone with that. It took her a long time to get through them. The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear the caterers starting to set up in the backyard. The scrape of folding tables, someone calling out about an extension cord. When she finally looked up, her face was, I don't have the right word for it. Not crying, not angry, not yet, just very, very still. She said, his son's name is Teddy. Yes. She looked back down at the papers. Teddy, she said again, quietly, like she was learning a fact about the world. Then she said, how long have you known? Since yesterday morning. You had dinner with me last night. I know. Why didn't you? Because I needed to be certain, I said. And because you were happy, and I needed it to be real before I took that from you. If I was wrong, I didn't want to be the person who put that shadow on your face for nothing. And if I was right, I stopped. I needed it to be documented. I needed you to have something real to hold on to, not just your mother's word. She was quiet for another long moment. Then she said, how do I know this isn't? She stopped herself. Started again. He said your family doesn't trust him. He said you'd always wanted him to fail. He had said that to her. I knew he had. I'd heard it reflected back in small ways over the past year. A hesitation here, a careful phrasing there. He'd been quietly building a case against me, and I hadn't fully understood it until right now. Read the investigator's name at the top of the document, I said. Look up the Hamilton court records. They're public. You can call Marta. She saw the woman and the child. You can call your friend Rosalind. I stopped because Rosalind was actually in the file. You can verify any of this, all of it. And if I'm wrong, if there is somehow an explanation for all of it, then I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you and to him. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Can you give me 10 minutes alone?" I said yes, and I left the room. I stood in the hallway. From downstairs, I could hear Marta speaking to the caterers. Outside, through the hall window, I could see the backyard being arranged for 60 people who were going to arrive in 5 hours expecting a celebration. 8 minutes later, Annalise opened the door. Her hair wasn't finished. She was still in the clothes she'd slept in. She had the envelope of documents in her hand. She said, "I want to talk to him." "Not you, not Marta. Me. Can you make sure he's in the guest suite?" I called Marta on my cell and told her quietly to make sure Christopher was kept in the guest suite. If he tried to leave, to find a reason to delay him. Marta has more ingenuity than people give her credit for. She managed it by asking him to help her move something heavy, a task that expanded, as tasks with Marta always do, for exactly as long as necessary. I waited at the kitchen table. 22 minutes later, Annalise came back into the kitchen. She looked like herself. That's the thing I remember most clearly. She looked like herself in a way that I found both relieving and heartbreaking. She sat down across from me in the chair she'd sat in for most of her life, and she said, "He didn't deny it. No. He said he was going to end it with her. He said he'd been trying to find the right time. He said he'd been trying to find the right time." He said. She stopped. He said a lot of things, but no, he didn't deny it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He said Teddy was an accident, like that was something he was allowed to say about his own child." I didn't say anything. "I think I knew something was off," she said. I thought they were normal things. He was always busy on certain mornings. He never wanted to go to Hamilton. He always had a reason. He'd take his phone into the other room sometimes. I told myself I was being paranoid. She looked at me. I told myself I was being paranoid because he told me I was being paranoid. That's the moment I came closest to crying. I held it together because she needed me to. She said, "I'm going to need your help calling the guests." So that's what we did. We spent the next 2.5 hours on the phone. We didn't explain in detail to everyone. For most people, it was simply, "We need to postpone. We're so sorry. We'll be in touch." Annalise made most of the calls herself. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone and her list, and she was, I want to say composed, but composed sounds cold. She was something else. She was deliberate. She chose the word she wanted, and she dialed, and she said it, and then she hung up, and she dialed again. 60 guests, one by one. I called the caterer and the photographer, and I managed the backyard. Christopher had gone by the time we were done. He'd packed his things and left without being asked. I'll give him that at least, though I won't give him much else. The rest of that day was one of the harder days I've had. I've had genuinely hard days. I lost my husband 6 years ago, and that was a different kind of hard, a long and grinding kind. But this was sharp. It was watching my daughter move through a house full of dismantled celebration, caterers taking things back out, the tables folded up again. All those flowers. She cried that night. Of course she did. She cried in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child, and I sat next to her and I didn't say anything useful because there wasn't anything useful to say. At some point she said, "What if I don't trust myself anymore? What if I don't know how to tell?" I said, "You knew something was wrong. You felt it. You just weren't allowed to trust what you felt." I paused. That's not a failure of your instincts. That's what it looks like when someone works very hard to override them. She thought about that. Then she said, "What about Teddy?" She meant it genuinely. She wasn't saying it bitterly. She was asking what would happen to a 4-year-old boy she'd never met, whose father had just blown apart 2 families at once. His mother will look after him, I said, and the courts will make sure his father does what he's supposed to. I thought of those civil claim documents. He won't be able to dodge it anymore. Annalise nodded slowly. I hope he's all right, she said. The little boy. That's my daughter. She was back at work by Monday. It took time, months, honestly, before she was fully herself again. But she got there. She has a life she built herself, and no one in the end could take that from her. I think about Marta a lot when I tell this story. About the fact that she grabbed my wrist in the kitchen at 6:40 in the morning because she'd been sitting on something for 3 weeks and couldn't sit on it anymore. She told me later she'd been afraid I wouldn't believe her, or that I'd be angry, or that she'd be wrong and would have caused damage that couldn't be undone. I asked her why she finally did it. She said because I kept thinking, what if I don't? And she goes through with it, and I could have stopped it. That's not a bad way to live, I think. What if I don't, and I could have stopped? That's not a bad way to live, I think. What if I don't, and I could have that? There are people in your life who see things you can't see, who notice the early morning phone calls and the gate in the back fence. Sometimes they don't know what they're seeing. Sometimes they wait too long. Sometimes they never say anything at all. I was lucky that mine said something, and I'll tell you this much. The engagement party never happened. But the spring after, Annalise and I flew out to Victoria for a long weekend and walked along the inner harbor and ate too many butter tarts from a bakery near the Empress, and I watched her laugh at something, a real laugh, the full body kind, and I thought, yes, there it is. She's okay. That was enough for me. That was more than enough. If you're listening to this and you have a feeling you keep talking yourself out of, maybe it's worth sitting with it a little longer. Maybe it's worth trusting it. Sometimes the people who love you most are standing at the kitchen window trying to figure out how to tell you something important. Let them tell you. I thought about that morning a lot in the months since. The coffee going cold on the counter, Marta's hand on my wrist, the way everything lived completely ordinary from the outside, the backyard, the quiet neighborhood, the early light, and was anything but. What I keep coming back to is not Christopher. Honestly, I spent very little energy on him. What I keep coming back to is the choice. The one Marta made, and then the one I made, and then the one I made, and then the one Eileen made. Because there were so many points along the way where any of us could have looked away. Marta could have stayed quiet for another week. I could have decided I hadn't seen what I saw through that window. Annalise could have believed the version of events he offered her, and he did offer one, she told me later, a long and practice-sounding one, and gone forward anyway because the alternative was too painful to face. None of us looked away. And I think that matters. There's something you need to end here. There's something you need to end here, against end here, the dramatic kind. Not the obvious kind, but the quiet, sustained kind that Christopher had been running for years across 2 cities and 2 households and 1 small child who deserved better. It doesn't usually collapse because someone catches it. It collapses because the people around it stop agreeing to be confused. Annalise had felt something was off for months. She told me so herself, standing at the kitchen sink. She'd had the feeling, and it had been systematically talked out of her, replaced with the suggestion that she was paranoid, that her instincts were the problem rather than what her instincts were responding to. That's not an accident. That's a method. So when she finally sat across from me with those documents in her hands, the thing she was really recovering wasn't just the truth about Christopher. She was recovering her own ability to trust what she'd felt all along. That's a harder thing to get back than people realize once it's been taken from you, and it takes time. But it comes back, the part of this story I'm proudest of. And I say that carefully because there isn't much to be proud of in a situation like this. Mostly there's just grief and cleanup, is that Annalise made 60 phone calls herself. She sat at that kitchen table with her list and her phone, and she did it, one by one, before she'd even had time to fully process what had happened to her. She could have handed the list to me. She could have gone upstairs and closed the door, and no one would have blamed her. But she didn't. She sat there and she dialed, and I think that said everything about who she is. The consequences for Christopher were his own doing, fully. Deanna's civil claim was still moving through the courts. His name was on a birth registration. Those facts existed before I hired anyone, before Marta said a word. They were always there, waiting. All we did was stop agreeing not to look at them. What a person builds their life on top of will eventually show through. It always does. I think about Teddy sometimes. 4 years old, dinosaur pajamas, arms reaching up. He didn't choose any of this. I hope he's all right. Annalise hoped so too, and she said it first, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person she is and the kind of future she's going to have. She's doing well now, better than well. She went to Victoria in the spring and she laughed that real, full-body laugh, and I thought, yes, that's enough. That's more than enough. If there's anything worth saying at the end of all this, it's only this. When something feels wrong, it usually is. And the people who love you, the ones who grab your wrist in the kitchen before you've even had your coffee, they're usually right too. Let them tell you. Trust yourself enough to hear it.